I would like to pass the word over to Professor Krishna, please, for the third installment of this wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
I've lost you. No, Professor, I've lost you. Professor Krishna, can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, I had to unmute myself. Yeah. As you mentioned, this is the last talk of this webinar. In the first talk, we looked at all the major challenges that are facing modern society and the possible causes for those. In the second talk, we considered how education can be modified to create a mind that is both knowledgeable and also has the wisdom to use that knowledge correctly. In that new vision of education, there was one major item which said that it is necessary to create a mind that is both scientific and religious at the same time. It has been considered not possible because majority of people have interpreted religion to mean belief, and science is not, belief is not acceptable to science. Since we live in a scientific age and science had to be taught, therefore, they have eliminated all talk of religion in our education system, except for some specialized departments which might study religion and philosophy. We said that it is really necessary for everybody to come upon such a mind which has both knowledge and wisdom. And the founders of the Theosophical Society already understood this in the 19th century when they founded the society with the motto, "There is no religion higher than truth." So they regarded religion as a quest for truth. And it was the purpose of religion to create spirituality. Spirituality being wisdom which transforms consciousness. And it is self-knowledge which is the key to wisdom. Therefore, in Theosophy, there was great emphasis on the quest for wisdom. In fact, both Madame Blavatsky and Annie Besant called Theosophy the wisdom religion. They said it is not a religion, it is the religion, the wisdom religion. Because without wisdom, religions as belief themselves divide mankind. And we've had more wars in the name of religion than even for property and ideology and so on. All of which becomes a travesty of anything called religion, because the very meaning of the word religion is to unite, not to divide. Actually, in ancient times, a learned man was inquiring into all questions. He was inquiring into scientific questions. He was inquiring into religious questions. And he was also inquiring into engineering questions. We come across people like Pythagoras, Archimedes, Leonardo da Vinci, and even Newton was not all that ancient, about 500 years ago. He wrote more papers on religion than he did on science. This is not known because he is really known as the architect of modern science. The divide between science and religion came in Europe because in Christianity, they were opposed to inquiry. And when the findings of a mathematician, philosopher, scientist called Bruno differed from the Christian church, he was burnt on the stake. That was 16th century. Again in the 17th century, when the findings of Galileo contradicted the beliefs of the Christian church, because he said his results supported the Copernican model, namely that the sun is at the center of the solar system and the earth and other planets are revolving around it. And the church maintained that according to the scripture, the earth is the center of the universe and everything else rotates around it. And they were not willing to listen to any other view. And they persecuted Galileo. He was imprisoned. He was asked to recant. And he did recant in order to save his skin. But it is reported that after the court had accepted his confession, repenting and so on, when he was leaving the court, he told his colleagues and friends, and yet it moves. That means whatever we may do, the fact is that the earth moves around the sun. That created a big divide between science and religion. But such a divide did not take place in the East. And therefore, in the East, in religions, there was belief, there was worship, there was prayer and ritual, but there has also been a long legacy of religious inquiry into the truth about our consciousness and about what is reality. Starting right from the Vedas and the Upanishads to the Buddha, and in the West to Socrates, and then on to Jesus. These are not people who formulated religions. Religions were made later by the followers. Instead of coming upon the wisdom of the teacher, they wanted to spread his word, make him into a hero, and establish a church or a temple or a mosque. That's how the orthodox religions came up. And if we take the example of Christianity, you find that differences of opinion took place in the church as to how to organize things, what rules to make, and so on. And the Protestants separated from the Catholics. Similar divisions occurred in all other religions also. In Islam, there is Shia and Sunni. In Hinduism and Buddhism, also there are various sects which differ from each other. But in the East, these divisions didn't create war. They were tolerated as differences of opinion. And a wise man was respected, irrespective of his opinions. There was no central belief which one had to hold in order to belong to a particular religion. This was so in Hinduism, it was so in Buddhism, it was so in Sikhism, in Jainism, and in Lao Tzu and Zen and Confucius. So this divide between science and religion didn't really take place in the East. And that legacy of inquiry was the inquiry into self-knowledge and the need to come upon wisdom. When you regard religion as an inquiry into truth, as theosophy maintained, there is no contradiction between science and religion. They become two complementary quests for truth. So in fact, the Theosophical Society also said that one of their objectives was to integrate science, philosophy, and religion into a single quest for truth. But in the majority of society, even among the intellectuals, religion is still regarded as belief. And therefore, they consider that religion needs to be thrown out of all education. Secularism in the West means no religion, pure materialism. In the East, secularism doesn't mean that. In the East, in India, secularism means equal respect for all religions. And indeed, Theosophical Society adopted that we must respect all religions as different paths to the same truth, but the truth is beyond all religion. And the quest for truth is the highest religion. When you regard religion in that way, then science and religion become complementary quests for truth in two different aspects of reality. Science deals with discovering the laws that govern the order of nature, what we call the cosmic order, which operates also in our body. And religion is the quest for discovering order in consciousness. It was Socrates who first pointed out that there is only one virtue, and that is order in consciousness. But it doesn't already exist. There is a lot of disorder in consciousness in the form of all the negative emotions, the ego, and all the consequences of the ego, the conflicts, the anger, the violence, and all that. So in order to discover order in consciousness, which is virtue at the level of consciousness, as distinct from the practice of virtuous actions formulated by the various religions, you can practice those even without coming upon the order in consciousness. And then it becomes hypocritical, because you don't have kindness, but you have decided to be kind. Or you are not non-violent, but you have decided not to hit anybody. So you give a very superficial meaning to non-violence. Actually, the anger, the jealousy, the violence, hatred in consciousness is already violence, even if it does not manifest externally in a major way. The Buddha also pointed that out, and the entire religious inquiry in the East was meant to liberate consciousness from all these negative emotions. They pointed out, the Buddha pointed out, that the disorder in consciousness in the form of all the negative emotions arises out of illusions, not out of facts. And that is why it can be ended, because illusion can be ended by discerning what is true and what is false. That's why the religious mind is a mind that is in quest of truth, which it can discover by discerning what is true and what is false. That's how science also progressed. For a long time, people believed all kinds of things which were not true in science. They believed that the earth was the center of the universe. We know that that was false. But a lot of inquiry and experiment and so on was necessary to discover that that is false. And similarly, the earth appeared flat, and it needed a lot of inquiry to discover that it's really a sphere of large radius, and that's why any small part of it on the surface appears flat. So science was also a quest for unlearning the illusions in the mind which we have with regard to how nature functions. And similarly, religion is a quest for unlearning the false notions in our mind, which were called illusions. Illusion means there is something you take to be true, which is not a fact of nature. It's not really true, but it's a construct of the human mind. And because you accept it, it becomes truth for you. And it is such beliefs which produce a lot of disorder in the form of fear and jealousy and anger and hatred. And therefore, these can be got rid of through the inquiry into what is true and what is false, which is really a process of unlearning the false. That's what self-knowledge is, unlearning the false in the mind. And that brings about wisdom, because there is not much wisdom in a mind which is filled with illusions. So what is the nature of these illusions? At the very superficial level, these are what we call superstitions. They go away even with intellectual inquiry and scientific inquiry. Then there are all these cultural illusions which vary from culture to culture. They include the belief in God, the description of what God is like and how you should pray to God and so on. All constructs of the human mind, not facts of nature. Nobody has seen the God. The Hindu doesn't know what Ishvara is, and the Muslim doesn't know what Allah is. They are asserting what they have been told, and that divides them because they feel only they are right. And because of that, there is so much violence and division in that community and so on. So all that arises, all that division and all that hatred and war arises out of illusion in the mind. And that's why importance was given in religious inquiry to what was called liberation. You liberate yourself from all these illusions in the mind through the quest for truth. The cultural illusions include all kinds of notions which we accept from society. In Hinduism, there is the notion of casteism. People are divided into 4 different castes. Somebody started casteism, we don't even know for what reason and in what form it started some 3,000 years ago. But the form it has taken now is to completely divide the people into 4 different communities which don't intermarry, and they try to dominate over each other, and it creates a major division in society. All based on that illusion, because there is really no difference between a Brahmin child and a Shudra child. If you look at their RNA and DNA, there is no difference, the body and the mind. You can educate the Shudra child and he'll turn out the same as a Brahmin child. So there are a lot of these cultural illusions which vary from culture to culture. But because we grow up with them, we don't realize that our mind is caught in illusion. And that's one of the problems, that the mind that has illusion is not aware that it is in illusion. If it is aware of its illusions, then there cease to be illusions. Like fairy tales. Fairy tales we know are not factual. Therefore, they are not illusions. Or metaphors in poetry and so on. We know that it's just a form of literature trying to communicate something. We don't take that to be actual, real. So when you know that something is illusory, it ceases to be an illusion. So to find out what notions in our mind are not really true and to observe what is the consequence of holding on to those illusions, points out the danger of holding it to illusions. But we have not been encouraged to do that inquiry. In education, the inquiry into science, into sociology, into history and geography and so on has been encouraged, but not into consciousness, not religious inquiry. So you find that people are very knowledgeable and intelligent in their professional field, but they are extremely ignorant about themselves. And the edict of Socrates, know thyself, or the Buddha saying that the knowledge of the world is a lower form of knowledge. It's really self-knowledge which is real knowledge. All that has been ignored. And we have simply cultivated knowledge without coming upon wisdom. We went into that last time and saw that this lopsided development of the human mind is the real cause for all our problems which we are facing in society today. And we formulated a new vision which would rectify that and transform consciousness so that we don't have these conflicts in our relations. So long as we have all these conflicts and divisions, you cannot get rid of war or rioting or all this violence and crime and so on. Then there are the psychological illusions, which psychologists talk about as complexes. They arise from the memories of fear and sorrow and so on, which you might have encountered in childhood. And they come up later on in life and disturb the consciousness of the mind of the individual. They are harder. They lie deeper in our consciousness. They are harder to eliminate. But it depends on your capacity, how deep your inquiry into your own consciousness goes. And when it goes to the level of that illusion, it can eradicate the illusion because the illusion is a non-fact. When you discover that, it just requires dropping the illusion. And it automatically drops when you discover that it is false. And the sages have pointed out that deeper than all this lies the illusion of the ego, which is the feeling that we are separate from other people and from nature, both living species as well as the non-living part of the universe. In actual fact, even science tells us that the whole thing is one. Ecology tells us that the earth and all its surroundings is like one single living organism. You hurt any one part of it, and the whole body suffers. And that's how the ecological catastrophes are arising, because we are looking at it piecemeal and using one part in order to feed another. So for economic progress, we want to remove the forests or animals and so on, not realizing that there is an intricate balance of interdependence among all of us. So we belong to this whole universe. We are part of this universe, but we have separated ourselves out. And that is also an illusion, which is called the illusion of the ego, the self. So the religious quest was to go as deep as that and eradicate that feeling of separateness. Mrs. Besant said, you are truly spiritual only when you realize that you are really one with all. And she even formulated a prayer like that. But merely to have these ideas and propagate these ideas doesn't make them real. You have to inquire into it and discern what is true and what is false in your own consciousness for it to become truth for you. Otherwise, it remains only as an idea, and ideas don't transform consciousness. Now, one question that one must address is, if science is an inquiry and so is religion an inquiry into truth, why is it that science has progressed so much and religiously, psychologically, we have remained more or less primitive? We have not advanced very much. Actually, science also didn't advance. For merely 2000 years after Aristotle, everybody just repeated what Aristotle said and believed in everything that he said, and it stunted all inquiry. It was in the time of Galileo that he pointed out the value of experiment and observation. The story has it that they used to discuss and argue theoretically whether a large stone will fall to the ground first or a small stone will fall first if they are released from the same height. And they could never agree. So there were debates and so on. And he climbed up the leaning tower of Pisa and actually dropped 2 stones from there and showed that they fall together. And then he wrote, when one experiment can mean more than 1,000 arguments. From that time on, the modern scientific method evolved and has been adopted as the real means of inquiry into whether something is true or it is false. I will show some slides to point out how that scientific inquiry developed. Let me open my PowerPoint. Can you see it?
Yes, that's fine, Professor. We can see that very clearly.
Okay. Let me make it a slideshow so that it will magnify. There you go. So the scientific approach now in modern science says posit reality as the unknown. We don't know what actually reality is. Is an electron a particle or a wave? We don't really know. It sometimes behaves like a particle and sometimes like a wave. And we have never seen an object that can be both a wave like on the surface of the sea and a particle like a football. So we can't comprehend what reality is. So we can't really go by our own imagination and so on. So they developed this objective method that when you want to study any phenomenon, you must begin with observation. So they observed the motion of the planets, which included measurement. How long, how much time it takes for them to make one circuit and so on. Those measurements, they tabulate and then they look for empirical correlations. So you had correlations like the current in a circuit is proportional to the voltage that is applied, or the laws of elasticity which said that the strain in the system is proportional to the stress that is applied, and so on. Having experimentally, empirically discovered those correlations, the next step is the big step in science, which is that the scientist has to guess an underlying model of reality. And thereafter, all theoretical consideration deals with this model. The model is really a conjecture. It is not reality. It is our guess as to what reality might be. And all physics deals with models in theory. So you have the model of the atom, you have the model of the universe, you have a model of a gas, you have a model of a liquid. And in order to discover whether that model is a good approximation to reality or not, you apply the known laws already discovered, you apply logic, reason, and a special form of logic evolved by the human mind called mathematics. And it's a great mystery why this form of logic applies in nature. In fact, it led Galileo to make a statement that God wrote the universe in the alphabet of mathematics. But because it is so, because mathematics is the language of nature, that is why science has progressed so much. Otherwise, it would not have progressed. So you apply that logic and the laws, and you develop what they call a theory. This theory has to be tested. So it must make predictions of new results, which are called predictions. And then in order to verify those predictions, you come back to experiment and observation. And there are 2 or 3 possibilities. One is that the calculated theoretical values do not agree with the observed values. In that case, you have to reject the model and start all over again and guess a new model of reality. Usually, or often, you find that the values don't completely disagree, but they don't completely agree either. So then you know that your model is not completely wrong, but you need to refine it in order to arrive at a more accurate model of reality. In this way, they make successive approximations to reality, but they never deal with reality in theory. They deal with reality only in experiment. And that's why experiment has great value. Now, human values are not the subject matter of science. There is nothing in science to say whether you should be kind or unkind. It's not an area where science predicts or makes any statement. It only talks about the order of nature, studying the order of nature. But the manner in which they have applied this method rigorously to consider whether some suggestion about reality is true or not has built in certain values which are called the scientific temper. And I have put those in the next slide as the scientific values or the scientific spirit, if you like. It says, posit reality as the unknown. Inquire, observe, question, doubt all conclusions, have an open mind. You may have a view, but that view, you know, may not be exact representation of reality. So non-acceptance of authority and respect for dissent is part of scientific temper. That means something is not true just because Einstein has said it. It has to be put to test according to the method we have just discussed. And they found that even great authorities had made mistakes, errors. Einstein, for example, could never accept quantum mechanics, but he was wrong, he was mistaken. So demand evidence, proof, reason. The other important element of the scientific temper is objectivity. That means the truth must be independent of the observer. So the same experiment is repeated by other people, and unless it can be demonstrably established for all people, it doesn't become part of science. This is also a limitation because since they eliminate the observer, science cannot really study the observer. And in the religious quest, we study the observer, the consciousness of the observer. So that divides science from religion, not a division as something contradictory, but something complementary in two different areas. Because matter and consciousness both exist. They are not the same thing, but they both exist, and therefore we need to understand space, time, matter, and energy, which is the realm of science, and we need to understand consciousness, which is the realm of religion or spirituality. Seventh, I have said universality. You may discover a truth in your laboratory, but that truth is independent of time and space. The same laws operate throughout the universe, even though you have discovered them only in your laboratory. This is a belief that has always held true, and therefore it's considered to be a truth, that the final ultimate truth is independent of time and space. Whatever results you find must be reproducible. We already said that. And an international dialogue goes on between scientists who don't even know each other, have never met each other. Because one scientist publishes his results and the journal goes all over the world. It is read by other scientists working in that field. They repeat the experiment or do their own experiments, and they publish their results. And so on. So a form of international dialogue goes on, to determine what the ultimate reality or truth is. Thus, there is only one science. There is no Christian science and Hindu science and American science. Either a stone is attracted by the earth or it is not attracted. It cannot be that it is attracted for the American and not attracted for the Indian. I like this definition of Feynman. He defined science as a body of knowledge, some of which is nearly certain, some rather uncertain, but none of it completely certain. Because repeatedly we have found that when we felt almost certain that what we have arrived at the ultimate truth about nature, suddenly a new discovery has come which completely changed the paradigm and the view of what the universe is like. And therefore, whatever is our present knowledge, we cannot assert that this is the ultimate truth. And that is why it is important to posit reality as the unknown. And today, we are again at that juncture because this whole theory of the Big Bang and the development of the universe, which was extremely successful till recently, till a decade ago, it was suddenly discovered that it explains only 5% of all the matter in the universe, which is visible to us. And there is a lot of matter which is dark matter, which does not interact with light, and therefore we have never been able to see it. It is still a puzzle what it is. And similarly, the universe is not just expanding, but it is accelerating. And we don't know what is the force which causes that acceleration. So, the scientific temper is a temper of great humility. It says, what we know is not the ultimate truth. Some of the scientists have been also philosophers and thinkers in a larger field. And I have noted down some quotations from senior scientists. Galileo wrote, "Mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe." Heisenberg, who gave the uncertainty principle of quantum mechanics, says science points to some central design, some purpose in the universe. Einstein said the religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. It should transcend a personal God and avoid dogma and theology, covering both the natural and the spiritual. It should be based on a religious sense arising from the experience of things, natural and spiritual, as a meaningful unity, which means he's talking about the unity of science and religion. Schumacher, he wrote, "The modern experiment to live without religion has failed." And Schrödinger gave a wonderful statement. He said, "I consider science as an integrating part of our endeavor to understand the one great philosophical question which embraces all others. Who are we? I consider this not one of the tasks, but the task of science, the only one that counts." Now we are both the body and the consciousness. So he's saying we must explain the body. Where did the atoms come from? The molecules, the entire biology of the body and so on. And also we must explain consciousness. And as at present, consciousness is a great mystery for science. Science does not know what consciousness is. They use consciousness to do their science, but their science cannot tell them what they are using. So there is still a lot that science needs to discover. Some quotations from Albert Einstein, who is considered the greatest scientist of the 20th century. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. Why should the human mind be able to comprehend the universe? The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion which stands at the cradle of all true art and science. So this sense of wonder, this sense of inquiry into the unknown, it is in fact nothing short of a miracle that the modern methods of instruction have not yet entirely strangled the holy curiosity of inquiry. For this delicate plant, aside from stimulation, stands mainly in need of freedom. Everything is determined by forces over which we have no control. It is determined for the insect as well as for human beings, vegetables, or cosmic dust. We all dance to a mysterious tune intoned in the distance by an invisible pied tribe. So you see here that the greatest minds find this unity between the scientific quest and the religious quest. And this is what Krishnamurti has to say about the religious mind. He says the religious mind has no beliefs. It has no dogma. It moves from fact to fact. And therefore the religious mind is the scientific mind. But the scientific mind is not the religious mind. The religious mind includes the scientific mind. But the mind trained in the knowledge of science is not a religious mind. He said that in Paris in 1961. So I summarize the conclusions of my talk. Science is a quest for discovering the order that manifests itself in the external world around us. Religion is a quest for discovering order in the inner world of our consciousness. They are two complementary quests for truth about two aspects of a single reality which includes both matter and consciousness. Antagonism or contradiction between them is the product of a narrow vision, a mistake in understanding, mainly the mistake of regarding religion as belief. Technology is a byproduct of the scientific quest, not the aim of the scientific quest. Similarly, orthodox religions are byproducts of the religious inquiry. After all, Jesus Christ didn't have Christianity to come upon the truths he came upon. And the Buddha didn't have Hinduism to guide him, Buddhism to guide him. So they are people who broke away from past knowledge and past beliefs and brought something new into the world. How did they do it? So in the 12th century, there was a philosopher in Japan called Basho. He said, don't follow the wise man. Pursue the wisdom he obtained. So the important thing is not to become followers of a teacher, but to take his help to come upon the wisdom which he has. And that means you have yourself to find out and rediscover what is true and what is false through your own observations. Then it becomes a truth for you. Otherwise, it's only knowledge of a truth which the Buddha saw or Krishnamurti saw. You have not seen, then your mind, the illusion in your mind has not ended, and therefore there is no transformation of your consciousness. So those are the conclusions of my